I need you to hear something that is going to challenge every political instinct you have. I need you to sit with it. I need you to resist the urge to react before you understand, because what I am about to tell you is not a political opinion. It is a prophetic pattern. And if you miss this, you will spend the next decade fighting the wrong enemy. God is using Donald Trump, not to save Black America, not to bless Black America, not to help Black America. He is using Donald Trump to expose white America, once and for all. Now I know what you just felt. I know the resistance that surged through your body when I said that name. I know some of you just reached for the back button, but I am asking you, I am pleading with you to stay, because this is not about left or right. This is not about Democrat or Republican. This is not about whether you like the man. This is about whether you understand what God is doing through the man. And those are two completely different questions. Let me give you the distinction that will frame everything that follows. There is a difference between an endorsement and an instrument. An endorsement says, I approve of this person. An instrument says, I am using this person. God does not need to approve of the hammer to drive the nail. God does not need to endorse the wind to scatter the chaff. God does not need to bless the fire to refine the gold. The tool does not need to be righteous. The tool needs to be effective. And Trump has been the most effective exposure tool in American history. Not because he is brilliant, not because he has some secret agenda of liberation, but because he is incapable of pretense. Every other president, every single one, maintained the performance. They wore the mask. They spoke the language of equality while operating the machinery of inequality. They signed legislation with one hand and signed executive orders with the other. They said, all men are created equal at the podium, and went home to a system that had never, not for one day, treated all men as equal. Trump does not wear the mask, not because he is honest, because he is incapable of the performance. And when the mask comes off, everything underneath is visible. The racism that was always policy becomes visible. The financial exploitation that was always economic becomes visible. The selective justice that was always legal becomes visible. The conditional humanity that was always constitutional becomes visible. The mask was always there. For 400 years, the mask was there. Smiling. Speaking the language of liberty. Pledging allegiance to equality. And underneath the mask, the same beast that built its economy on human trafficking, its agriculture on slave labor, its infrastructure on chain gangs, its modern wealth on redlined communities and mass incarceration. Trump did not create any of this. He revealed it. And that distinction between creator and revealer is the key that unlocks this entire message. Stay with me, because once you understand the biblical pattern behind this, you will never see American politics the same way again. What we are going to walk through today is not current events commentary. It is pattern recognition. God has done this before. God has used instruments before. And every single time, the instrument served a specific purpose. And the people who understood the purpose were liberated, while the people who fixated on the instrument were trapped. This is that moment. This is your moment to understand what God is doing. Not what Trump is doing, what God is doing. And once you see it, the mask is off forever. Let me take you into the scriptures. Because this is not a new strategy. God has been using imperfect, unrighteous, sometimes outright wicked vessels to accomplish his purposes for thousands of years. And the pattern is so consistent that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Case 1, Cyrus the Great. Open your Bible to Isaiah chapter 45. Read the first verse with me. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. Stop right there. God called Cyrus my anointed, in Hebrew, Mashiach, the same word used for the Messiah. God applied the Messiah title to a pagan king, a man who did not worship Yahweh, a man who worshipped Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian deity, a man who had never read the Torah, a man who had never stepped foot in the temple, a man who did not know the God who was using him. And verse 5 confirms this explicitly. I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I will gird you, though you have not known me. Though you have not known me. God is literally saying, I am going to use you, empower you, gird you for battle, and you don't even know who I am. Now what did Cyrus do? He conquered Babylon. He issued the decree that allowed the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. He funded the reconstruction. He returned the temple vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen. He accomplished the most important restoration event in Israel's post-exile history. And he did it without faith, without conversion, without spiritual motivation. He did it because it was politically convenient for him to have loyal populations across his empire. His motivation was entirely political, but God's purpose through him was entirely prophetic. That is pattern point 1. God uses the political ambition of instruments to accomplish prophetic objectives. The instrument's motivation is irrelevant. The instrument's character is irrelevant. The instrument's awareness is irrelevant. What matters is the result. Case 2. Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel chapter 1 opens with Nebuchadnezzar conquering Jerusalem. He destroys the temple. He takes the sacred vessels. He deports the population. He is, by every measure, an enemy of God's people. But Jeremiah chapter 25 verse 9 reveals something shocking. God calls Nebuchadnezzar my servant, Avdi, the same word used for Moses, David, and Abraham. God looked at the king who was destroying his temple and said, "That is my servant doing my work." Why? Because Israel had violated the covenant. They had turned to idol worship. They had oppressed the poor. They had ignored the prophets. And God had established, centuries earlier in Deuteronomy 28, that covenant violation leads to exile. Nebuchadnezzar was not punishing Israel on his own initiative. He was executing a sentence that God had pronounced 500 years earlier. But here is the critical second act. Daniel chapter 4. After Nebuchadnezzar served his purpose, he made a fatal error. He stood on the roof of his palace and said, "Is not this great Babylon, that I have built by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" He took credit. He claimed ownership of what God had given him temporarily. And immediately, while the words were still in his mouth, a voice from heaven said, "The kingdom has departed from you." And Nebuchadnezzar was driven from among men. He ate grass like an animal. His hair grew like eagle feathers. His nails grew like bird claws. For 7 years, the instrument that claimed the results as his own was reduced to an animal. Pattern point 2. Instruments that take credit are destroyed after they serve their purpose. The instrument is temporary. The purpose is permanent. Case 3. Pharaoh. This is the most revealing case, because with Cyrus, God used the instrument's ambition. With Nebuchadnezzar, God used the instrument's power. But with Pharaoh, God used the instrument's stubbornness. Exodus chapter 9 verse 16. God speaks directly to Pharaoh through Moses. "But indeed, for this purpose, I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth." Read that again. "For this purpose I have raised you up." God did not just allow Pharaoh to exist. God raised him up. God put him on the throne specifically so that the 10 plagues would be spectacular enough to echo through history for 3,000 years. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, not because Pharaoh was uniquely evil, but because God needed the resistance to be maximum so that the liberation would be undeniable. Every plague was a dismantling of an Egyptian god. Water to blood, Hapi, god of the Nile. Frogs, Heket, frog goddess of fertility. Darkness, Ra, the sun god. Death of firstborn, Pharaoh himself, considered the son of Ra. God used Pharaoh as the stage on which he performed the systematic humiliation of every false deity in the most powerful empire on earth. And one more case, perhaps the most humbling. Balaam's donkey. Numbers chapter 22. God used a donkey to deliver a prophetic message. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road. Balaam, the prophet, was blind to it. The donkey stopped, turned aside, crushed Balaam's foot against a wall, and then God opened the donkey's mouth and it spoke. If God can use a donkey to deliver a prophetic word, then God can certainly use a billionaire with a platform to deliver a prophetic exposure. The vessel is irrelevant. The message is everything. Stop debating the character of the vessel. Start reading the message the vessel is delivering. Pattern summary. God selects instruments based on effectiveness, not righteousness. Cyrus was effective because of his political ambition. Nebuchadnezzar was effective because of his military power. Pharaoh was effective because of his stubbornness, and the donkey was effective because it was in the right place at the right time. Ask yourself, what makes Trump effective as an exposure instrument? His inability to perform, his refusal to wear the mask, his compulsive need to say out loud what every other president kept hidden. That is why God raised him up, not for his character, for his transparency. Now let me show you the catalog, because the exposure is not vague, it is not abstract, it is specific, itemized, documented. And once I walk you through it, you will see that what happened in the last several years was not political chaos. It was a prophetic audit. God pulled back the curtain on specific systems, specific structures, specific lies, and exposed them with a precision that no investigative journalist, no activist, no academic could have achieved. Exposure 1. DI was paint, not foundation. Diversity, equity, inclusion programs were celebrated as the proof that corporate America had changed. Finally, the boardrooms were opening. Finally, the pipelines were debiased. Finally, the system was correcting itself. Then executive orders came, and in weeks, not years, not decades, weeks, the programs were dismantled, budgets cut, officers removed, training canceled, initiatives archived. Companies that had spent millions on DEI branding pivoted to efficiency and merit overnight. Now think about what this reveals. If DEI was structural, if it was embedded in the operational DNA of these institutions, it could not have been removed in weeks. A foundation cannot be ripped out with a pen stroke. Only paint can be scraped off that quickly, which means DEI was never foundation. It was all with paint. Decorative, cosmetic, applied for brand management, not for justice. Applied for legal protection, not for equity. Applied because it was marketable, not because it was moral, and the speed of the removal told you exactly how deep it went. Not deep at all. One executive order proved that decades of progress were veneer, and veneer, by definition, is designed to make something appear to be something it is not. Exposure 2. Protection was conditional. Here is a truth that the exposure forced to the surface. Rights that only function when the right person is in office are not rights. They are permissions. And the fundamental difference between a right and a permission is this. A right exists independently of who has power. A permission requires the ongoing goodwill of the one who holds power. Voting rights, reproductive rights, civil rights, environmental protections, immigration frameworks. Every one of these operated as though they were constitutional bedrock, but each of them depended on enforcement. And enforcement depended on who was in charge of enforcing. When the enforcer changed, the rights evaporated. This is what the exposure revealed. Black America had been living inside a system of conditional protection. Protected when the political winds were favorable. Unprotected the moment the weather changed. The shield was never bolted to the wall. It was held by someone who could put it down at any time, and the instrument showed everyone exactly how easily the shield could be lowered. Think about what that means practically. You built your life plan on the assumption that certain protections would persist. You chose where to live, where to work, where to send your children based on the assumption that the institutional shield would remain. And the instrument revealed that the shield was never institutional. It was personal. It depended on specific individuals occupying specific offices, making specific choices. Remove those individuals, and the shield dissolves. Exposure 3. Justice was selective. The same legal system, the same courtrooms, the same constitution, the same judges, but radically different outcomes depending on who stood before them. The exposure did not create this reality. It made it undeniable. Same offense, different sentencing. Same evidence, different prosecution decisions. Same laws, different enforcement intensity. The instrument did not build the two-tier system. The two-tier system has existed since the 13th Amendment included the except as punishment for crime clause. That single exception, 5 words in a constitutional amendment, created the legal foundation for convict leasing, chain gangs, and eventually the most massive incarceration system in human history. 5 words turned abolition into rebranded bondage. The 13th Amendment did not end slavery. It privatized it. It moved it from the plantation to the penitentiary, and the pipeline from community to courtroom to prison cell became the new Middle Passage. Different ships, same destination, same commodification of black bodies. But the instrument removed the pretense that the system was working toward fairness. He showed that the system was working perfectly. It was simply designed for a purpose different from the one advertised. Justice was not blind. Justice was selective. And selective justice is not justice at all. It is a control mechanism disguised as a civic institution. Exposure 4. The social contract had an asterisk. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Beautiful language, magnificent prose, inspiring rhetoric. But the men who wrote those words owned human beings as property. The Constitution that enshrined "we the people" counted black people as 3/5 of a person for congressional apportionment purposes. The Bill of Rights that guaranteed freedom of speech, religion, and assembly did not apply to anyone in chains. The asterisk was always there. All men are created equal. And the asterisk led to the fine print. Conditions apply, subject to melanin content, void where enforcement is inconvenient, offer valid only for those the system recognizes as fully human. The exposure brought the asterisk from the fine print to the headline. It moved the hidden terms and conditions to the front page. And what millions of black Americans had been saying for centuries, that the promise was always selective, was finally visible to everyone who had previously denied it. Now here is the key that ties all 4 exposures together. The instrument did not create any of these realities. DEI was always paint. Protection was always conditional. Justice was always selective. The contract always had an asterisk. These were not new conditions. They were conditions that had been successfully hidden. And the instrument's only function, the only reason God raised him up, was to make the hidden visible. Like Pharaoh's hardened heart made God's power visible. Like Nebuchadnezzar's conquest made Israel's covenant violation visible. Like Cyrus's decree made God's faithfulness to restoration visible. The instrument reveals what already exists. The instrument does not create reality. The instrument exposes it. And now that it is exposed, it can never be hidden again. Now I want to take you somewhere that most pastors will not go. I want to open Revelation chapters 17 and 18. Because what we are watching in America right now is not just political. It is prophetic. And the template was written 2,000 years ago. Revelation chapter 17, verse 1. Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Verse 3. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Verse 4. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. Let me unpack the imagery. The woman is riding the beast. She is not the beast itself. She is the presentation layer. She wears the gold, the purple, the jewels. She holds the golden cup. She looks magnificent from the outside. She represents the brand, the marketing, the messaging, the image that the system projects to the world. But the cup she holds, though golden on the outside, is full of abominations inside. And the beast she rides, though she decorates it with her beauty, is covered in blasphemous names. The beauty is a mask over the beast. The golden cup is a container for filth. The entire visual is a study in what theologians call imperial deception, making the monstrous look majestic. Now think about the American project through this lens. The woman is the brand. Liberty, justice, equality, opportunity. The shining city on a hill. Beautiful words, golden rhetoric, purple prose. The presentation is magnificent. The Statue of Liberty holds her torch. The Constitution declares its truths. The Declaration proclaims its self-evidence. But the beast she rides, the actual machinery underneath the brand, was built on slavery, sustained by segregation, modernized through mass incarceration, and maintained by economic extraction. The beast has never changed. Only the woman's outfit has changed. Every generation gets a new wardrobe, new language, new legislation, new programs. But the beast underneath remains the same creature that arrived on the shores of Jamestown in 1619 with a cargo hold full of kidnapped human beings. Now here is the revelation that connects directly to our thesis. Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. The beast turns on the woman. The machinery turns on the brand. The underlying system attacks its own presentation layer. And when the woman falls, when the beautiful rider is thrown from the beast, what is left? The beast, exposed, naked. No more golden cup, no more purple robes, no more jeweled presentation. Just the raw, blasphemous, multi-headed creature that was always there underneath. That is what is happening. The rider, the performance of democracy, equality, and justice, is being thrown from the beast. And what remains visible is the beast itself, raw, unapologetic, stripped of its decorative layer. The instrument did not create the beast. The instrument knocked the rider off. And then Revelation chapter 18. The merchandise. Verse 11. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. What follows is a complete inventory of Babylon's trade goods: gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, ivory, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, chariots. And then the list ends. Verse 13. The final two items on the merchandise list: and bodies and souls of men. Bodies and souls of men. The last item on the trade list. After the gold, after the precious stones, after the cinnamon and incense, at the bottom of the ledger, as the final, most profitable product, human beings, their bodies for labor, their souls for consumption. The entire economic system, when you trace it to its foundation, rests on the commodification of human life. That was written 2,000 years ago, and it describes, with surgical precision, the economic system that enslaved Africans, transported them across the Atlantic, sold their bodies at auction, extracted their labor without compensation, and then, when chattel slavery became unworkable, transitioned to convict leasing, sharecropping, redlining, and mass incarceration to continue the extraction through different mechanisms. The merchandise list has not changed, only the packaging has changed, and the exposure we are witnessing is the moment when the packaging is removed and the product list becomes visible to everyone. But Revelation 18 gives us even more detail. Verse 17. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. 1 hour. Not a generation, not a decade, not even a year. 1 hour. The collapse of the facade is sudden. The merchants who profited from the system are weeping not because they feel guilt. They are weeping because the profitability has ended. Verse 11 makes this explicit. They weep because no one buys their merchandise anymore. The tears are not ethical. They are financial. The system mourns its own profit margin, not its own cruelty. And think about how this maps to the modern exposure. How quickly did DEI collapse? Not over years of debate, over weeks of executive action. How quickly did allyship evaporate? Not through gradual disillusionment, through overnight corporate pivots. How quickly did the performance of inclusion end? The moment it became financially inconvenient. The 1 hour of Revelation 18 is not hyperbole. It is a description of how quickly systems of pretense collapse when the incentive to pretend disappears. Verse 19. The merchants threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships in the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. The key phrase, all who had ships in the sea. The entire global trade network profited from Babylon's system. The entire world was invested in the pretense. The exposure affects not just the domestic system, it reveals the global complicity. Every corporation that profited from appearing progressive while maintaining extractive practices. Every nation that pointed at American democracy as a model while ignoring the asterisk. Every institution that invested in the brand while knowing the beast was underneath, the ships in the sea, the global network of complicity. And Revelation 18, verse 20. Flips the mourning into celebration. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you, holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. While the merchants weep, heaven rejoices. The exposure is judgment for the system and vindication for the oppressed. What the system calls catastrophe, heaven calls justice. Babylon is not a city. Babylon is a system. And every system built on the merchandise of human souls eventually has its rider removed, its beast exposed, and its merchants weeping because the game is up. The game is up. Now let me answer a question that I know you have been sitting with. If the system was always this way, if the beast was always underneath the rider, then why did God wait until now to expose it? And more importantly, why did Black America need this exposure? Was it not enough to know? Did we not already know? You knew. Of course you knew. Your grandparents knew. Your great-grandparents knew. Every generation of Black Americans has known, at a visceral, experiential level, that the system was not designed for them, that the promise was hollow. Historical proof. Reconstruction. Black political power. Then Jim Crow erased it. During Reconstruction, Black Americans held over 1,500 public offices, including 2 United States senators, 20 congressmen, and hundreds of state legislators. The Freedmen's Bureau was established. Land redistribution was promised. 40 acres and a mule. Special Field Order Number 15, signed by General Sherman, allocating 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land to formerly enslaved families. Then Andrew Johnson revoked the order. The land was returned to the former slaveholders. The 40 acres vanished. The mule was never delivered. And within 12 years, the entire political infrastructure of Black Reconstruction was dismantled by violence, voter suppression, and the Compromise of 1877, which withdrew federal troops from the South and abandoned Black Americans to the mercy of the same people who had enslaved them. 12 years. 12 years of genuine political power, granted by the outcome of a war and revoked by a political deal. The Reconstruction experiment proved 2 things. First, that Black Americans were fully capable of self-governance, and second, that any power base built within the existing system existed at the pleasure of that system. When it became politically convenient to abandon Black Americans, they were abandoned, without hesitation, without apology. Integration gains of the 1960s, then mass incarceration reversed them. The Civil Rights Movement won landmark legislation, but the war on drugs, declared by Nixon in 1971 and militarized under Reagan in the 1980s, created a new mechanism for the same old extraction. Nixon's domestic policy advisor, John Ehrlichman, admitted in a 1994 interview, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be Black, but by getting the public to associate Black people with drugs and then criminalizing drugs heavily, we could disrupt those communities." The quiet part said out loud. The system did not reform, it rebranded. Every gain within the existing system was temporary, but knowing something personally and seeing it publicly exposed are 2 fundamentally different things. And the difference matters more than you might think. Let me explain through what I call the reform trap. For 60 years, from the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to today, the dominant strategy of Black American political engagement has been reform from within. Get seats at the table, win elections, pass legislation, build coalitions, work within the existing framework to change it from the inside. And there were real gains. Undeniable gains. The Voting Rights Act, affirmative action, the desegregation of schools, workplaces, and public spaces, the election of Black mayors, governors, senators and a Black president. These were not small achievements. These were monumental. But here is the question the exposure forces you to confront. How many of those gains were permanent? The Voting Rights Act, gutted by the Supreme Court in 2013. The very section that required pre-clearance for states with histories of racial discrimination, struck down. And immediately, states began passing voter restriction laws that disproportionately affected Black voters. Affirmative action, eliminated by the Supreme Court in 2023. The framework that had opened university doors for a generation, removed. Not reformed. Removed. DEI programs, dismantled by executive order. Overnight. Do you see the pattern? Every gain that was achieved within the existing system was achieved through mechanisms that the system controlled. Legislation can be repealed. Court decisions can be overturned. Executive orders can be reversed. Policies can be gutted. And every single one of those gains, every seat at the table, every policy victory, every legislative achievement, existed at the pleasure of the system. The system granted them. And what is granted can be revoked. This is the critical distinction. Earned versus granted. Everything you build yourself is earned. Everything you are given by the system is granted. A seat at someone else's table can be taken away by the person who owns the table. A table you build in your own house. Nobody can take that from you. Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. Black Americans built an entire economic ecosystem. Banks, hotels, hospitals, schools, newspapers, theaters, law firms, 15 physicians, 2 dentists, a dozen churches. Self-contained, self-sufficient, internally circulating wealth that created earned prosperity. And it was destroyed. Bombed from the air, burned to the ground, 300 people killed, 10,000 black residents left homeless. The earned prosperity was destroyed precisely because it was working, because it demonstrated that black Americans didn't need the system, and a population that doesn't need the system cannot be controlled by the system. But here is what the destruction of Black Wall Street actually proved. The concept worked. The model was sound. The only reason it was destroyed was because it threatened the power structure, which means the concept was more powerful than the system that destroyed it. They had to use military force to stop an economic experiment. That tells you everything you need to know about how threatening self-sufficiency is to the existing order. So why did Black America need this exposure? Because the reform trap needed to be broken. The cycle. Gain, then revocation, then gain again, then revocation again, needed to be recognized as a cycle, not as progress. Every gain that depended on the system's goodwill was by definition temporary, and the exposure of the last several years made that undeniable. The exposure did not just show you that the system is broken. The exposure showed you that the system is working exactly as designed. It was never designed to produce equality. It was designed to produce the appearance of equality while maintaining the machinery of extraction. And a system working as designed cannot be reformed. It can only be replaced. This is the clarity gift. It hurts. It is painful to accept that 60 years of reform strategy, 60 years of coalition building, 60 years of working within the system produced gains that could be reversed in a single election cycle. But that pain is also liberation, because a prisoner who knows the door is not opening stops wasting energy on the door and starts building a new exit. God allowed the exposure because the generational cycle of grant then revoke needed to end, and it ends when the people who are trapped in the cycle see the cycle for what it is, stop participating in it, and start building something that belongs to them. Not a seat at their table, your own table. Revelation chapter 18, verse 4. This is the pivotal verse, the verse that transforms everything from analysis to action, the verse that moves you from understanding the problem to implementing the solution. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues." 3 critical observations about this verse. First, the command is addressed to my people. God's people are inside Babylon. They are not outside looking in. They are not observers of the system. They are participants in the system. They live in Babylon. They work in Babylon. They worship in Babylon. They raise children in Babylon. And God is telling them to come out. Second, the reason for coming out is not just spiritual. It is practical. Lest you share in her sins is the spiritual reason. Lest you receive of her plagues is the practical reason. The plagues are coming. The judgment is certain. And anyone who remains inside the system when judgment falls will be affected by the judgment, not because they are guilty, but because they are present. Third, the command is to come out, not to reform from within, not to fix the system, not to make Babylon better. Come out. The language is not improve her. The language is not educate her. The language is not vote for better leadership within her. The language is exodus, departure, extraction. Now let me break this exodus into 3 practical levels, because come out of Babylon is not just a spiritual metaphor. It is a strategic directive that applies to every dimension of life. Level 1, spiritual exodus. This is the foundation. You must leave the theological framework of your oppressor. The Christianity that was taught on the plantation was designed to produce obedience, not liberation. Slaves, obey your earthly masters, was preached from slave pulpits every Sunday. While the slaveholders conveniently ignored, there is neither slave nor free, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. The Bible used to justify slavery was an edited Bible. The so-called Slave Bible, published in 1807 by the Society for the Conversion of Negro Slaves, removed 90% of the Old Testament and 50% of the New Testament. It removed every passage about liberation. It removed the Exodus. It removed the prophets who thundered against oppression. It kept only the passages that promoted submission. Spiritual exodus means reclaiming the whole Bible. The God of the Exodus, who liberated slaves. The God of the prophets, who condemned the powerful for oppressing the vulnerable. The God of justice, who declared, "Let my people go." Not the plantation God who said, "Stay in your place." The whole God, not the edited version. Level 2, economic exodus. Every dollar that leaves the Black community permanently is a dollar that builds someone else's infrastructure. Studies consistently show that a dollar circulates within the Black community for approximately 6 hours before leaving. In Asian American communities, 28 days. In white communities, 20 days. In Jewish communities, 20 days. 6 hours versus 28 days. That gap is not cultural. It is structural. There are fewer Black-owned banks, fewer Black-owned grocery stores, fewer Black-owned insurance companies, fewer Black-owned everything. The infrastructure for internal circulation does not exist at scale. And without internal circulation, wealth cannot compound. Money flows in through labor, flows out through consumption, and the community remains a conduit rather than a reservoir. Economic exodus means building the infrastructure for internal circulation. Credit unions, cooperative businesses, community investment funds. Buy Black campaigns that are systematic, not symbolic. Every institution you build inside the community is an institution that is not controlled by the system. And institutions you control are institutions that cannot be executive ordered away. Level 3, psychological exodus. This is the hardest exodus, and it is the most important. Because you can leave Babylon physically and remain in Babylon psychologically. Genesis chapter 19, verse 26. Lot's wife. She was physically leaving Sodom. Her feet were moving. Her body was departing. But her heart was still in the city. She looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Psychological exodus means you stop measuring your success by Babylon's metrics. You stop craving Babylon's validation. You stop seeking Babylon's approval. You stop defining beauty by Babylon's standards, intelligence by Babylon's assessments, worth by Babylon's economy, success by Babylon's definition. Do you know what making it looks like in Babylon's framework? A corner office in a corporation you do not own. A title in an institution that would exist perfectly well without you. A seat at a table where the menu was written before you arrived. These are not achievements. They are positions within someone else's system. And positions within someone else's system are granted at someone else's discretion. Psychological exodus means you define your own metrics, your own standards, your own definition of success, your own framework for value. And that internal shift, that mental departure from Babylon, is the shift that makes every other exodus possible. Because a people who have left Babylon psychologically will naturally build their own institutions, circulate their own wealth, and worship their own God. The psychological is the foundation. Everything else follows. Come out of her, my people, not someday. Now, while the exposure is fresh, while the mask is still on the ground, before the next cycle of performative inclusion reapplies the paint and remounts the rider on the beast. Come out now, Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 17. This is your blueprint. Those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction and with the other held a weapon. One hand building, one hand defending, simultaneously. Not build first, then defend. Not secure the perimeter first, then construct. Both, at the same time. Because the enemies of construction never wait for you to finish before they attack. They attack during construction. And a people who wait for safety before they start building will never build. This is the Nehemiah blueprint applied to the post-exposure moment. You now see the system clearly. You have come out of Babylon psychologically. Now you build. And you build while defending what you build. Here are the 4 construction moves. Move 1. Economic infrastructure. This is the wall nearest your house. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 15 tells the builders, build nearest your own house first. You do not start by trying to change the global economy. You start by building the economic infrastructure closest to your daily life. Community credit unions, not banks that answer to shareholders who do not live in your neighborhood. Credit unions that answer to members who are your neighbors. When your money is deposited in a community credit union, it is lent back to community members for homes, businesses, and education. The money stays. Cooperative businesses, grocery cooperatives, where the community owns the store collectively. Housing cooperatives, where residents own the building collectively. Business cooperatives, where multiple entrepreneurs share resources, reduce costs, and increase purchasing power. Cooperatives are not charity, they are strategy. They combine individual weakness into collective strength. Buy black, but systematically, not symbolically, not a hashtag, not a one-day event. A deliberate, organized, database-driven commitment to redirect spending. Every dollar redirected is a dollar that builds your infrastructure instead of someone else's. And the data proves it. Dr. Claude Anderson's research shows that if Black Americans redirected just 15% of their combined $1.8 trillion in annual spending power to Black-owned businesses, it would be the equivalent of a Marshall Plan operating permanently inside the community. Move 2. Educational sovereignty. You must control what your children learn. Because the system that educated your children was the same system that erased their history, diminished their identity, and trained them to function within Babylon rather than to build outside of it. Homeschool networks, co-ops, community schools, supplementary educational programs that teach what the public system omits, the empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, the University of Timbuktu, which was educating scholars while Europe was in the Dark Ages, the mathematical systems, astronomical observations, and architectural achievements that preceded European contact by centuries. Carter G. Woodson wrote it in 1933, and it remains true. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. And the reverse. When you liberate a person's thinking, their actions become unstoppable. Educational sovereignty is not about rejecting Western education. It is about supplementing it with the truth the system removed. Move 3. Spiritual independence. Develop theological frameworks that center liberation, not submission. The Christianity that was imported with slavery was edited Christianity. The prophets were removed. The liberation narratives were suppressed. The God of Exodus was replaced with the God of obedience. Spiritual independence means reclaiming the full prophetic tradition. Isaiah thundering against the powerful. Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights. Amos demanding justice. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Jesus himself declaring his mission. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to set at liberty those who are oppressed. This is your theological heritage. Liberation is not a side note in Scripture. It is the main text. Move 4. Local political self-determination. Stop chasing federal representation. Federal politics is spectacle. It generates celebrities, not change. The real power, the power that affects your daily life, is local. School boards determine what your children learn. City councils determine zoning, policing, and budgets. County commissions determine infrastructure, healthcare access, and economic development. Control the local institutions. Run for school board. Not to diversify someone else's institution, to direct the institution that shapes your children. Run for city council. Not to have a voice at the table, to set the menu. Run for county commission. Not to be represented, to govern. The Nehemiah principle. Build the wall nearest your house. The institutions nearest your daily life are local. Build there. These 4 moves, economic infrastructure, educational sovereignty, spiritual independence, and local political self-determination, are the 4 sections of Nehemiah's wall. Each section is defended by the families who live nearest to it, and when every section is built, the wall is complete. Not because a centralized authority mandated it, because a decentralized community each built their section. One hand building, one hand defending. That is the blueprint. That is the way forward. Now I need to address the question that will inevitably arise. But what about Trump? What happens to him? And the answer, from the biblical pattern, is this. The instrument is always discarded after its purpose is served. Always, without exception. Nebuchadnezzar after the purpose. We have already discussed Daniel chapter 4. But I want you to sit with the detail of what happened to him, because the detail is instructive. Verse 33. That very hour the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. 7 years of this. The most powerful man on earth, the king of the largest empire, reduced to an animal in a field, eating grass, sleeping in dew, unrecognizable. And the transformation was not gradual. It happened that very hour. One moment he was declaring his greatness from the rooftop of his palace. The next moment, he was crawling on all fours in a pasture. Why? Because he claimed the results as his own. Is not this great Babylon that I have built? He took credit. He said, I built this, when God had used him to build it. And the moment the instrument claims ownership of the result, the instrument is destroyed. Cyrus after the purpose. Cyrus conquered Babylon in 539 BC. He issued the liberation decree. The exiles returned. The temple was rebuilt. His purpose was complete. After that, the Achaemenid Empire continued for a few generations, then was conquered by Alexander the Great. Cyrus's legacy became a footnote in someone else's story. He was a chapter, not the book. His dynasty ended. His empire was absorbed. History moved past him. And that is the fate of every instrument, to be a chapter in a story that is not about them. The instrument thinks the story is about them. The instrument believes they are the main character. But the story is about God's purpose, and the instrument is a supporting character who exits the stage when their scene is over. Pharaoh after the purpose. Exodus chapter 14, verse 27. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Verse 28. The waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. Think about the scene. The entire Egyptian military machine, the most advanced army in the ancient world. 600 choice chariots with captains over every one of them, plus all the other chariots of Egypt. A force so massive that when the Israelites saw them approaching, they cried out in terror and said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness?" The people were surrounded. Sea in front, army behind, mountains on both sides, no escape. And God said to Moses, "Tell the children of Israel to go forward. Forward into the sea. Forward into what looked like death. Forward into what appeared to be suicide." And when they obeyed, when they stepped into impossibility, the waters divided. The wind blew all night, dry ground appeared, and the people walked through on dry land. And then the Egyptians followed. The same path, the same dry ground, the same corridor between walls of water. But for them, the path wasn't liberation. It was a trap. The wheels came off their chariots, the formation broke, and the waters returned. Not so much as one of them remained. The same water that opened for God's people, closed on God's instrument. The same Red Sea that was the path of liberation for Israel was the site of destruction for Pharaoh. The instrument's end came at the same location as the people's liberation. The instrument's destruction and the people's freedom occurred in the same event. That is perhaps the most powerful insight. The liberation of the people and the destruction of the instrument are simultaneous. They happen in the same moment, at the same place, in the same event. Which means the instrument's fate is not your concern. Your only concern is your liberation. The instrument will be handled. God has always handled the instruments after the purpose was served. Here is the practical lesson. Do not waste emotional energy on the instrument. Do not hate Trump. Hatred generates obsession, and obsession generates attention, and attention generates power for the object of your attention. Every minute you spend angry about the instrument is a minute you are not spending building your wall. Do not love Trump. Some have fallen into the trap of thinking the instrument is actually working for them. He is not. He is working for himself. God is routing his self-interest through a prophetic purpose, but the instrument has no awareness of and no commitment to that purpose. Do not debate Trump. The debate about the instrument is the debate that Babylon wants you to have. While you argue about the person, the system continues to function. While you post about the personality, the structure remains unchallenged. The instrument is designed to absorb your attention so that the beast underneath goes unexamined. Instead, study the revelation. What did the instrument expose? What systems were revealed? What pretenses were removed? What conditions were made visible? That is where your attention belongs, not on the messenger, on the message. Focus on the revelation, not the revealer. That is the post-instrument discipline that separates the people who are liberated from the people who remain trapped in the cycle. So here is where we land. Not with anger, not with despair, not with political commentary, but with clarity. Clarity that no election can take from you. Clarity that no executive order can reverse. Clarity that belongs to you permanently. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. 3 declarations. 3 statements you need to speak out of your mouth, not as wishes, not as prayers, as strategic positions. Declaration 1. I see. I see what the instrument exposed. I see that DEI was paint, not foundation. I see that protection was conditional, not constitutional. I see that justice was selective, not universal. I see that the social contract always had an asterisk I was never shown. I see the beast underneath the rider. I see the merchandise list that ends with human souls. I see. And I will not allow the next cycle of performative inclusion to make me unsee. The paint can be reapplied. The rider can be remounted. But I will know from now on that the paint is paint and the rider is a costume. Declaration 2. I exit. I exit Babylon at 3 levels. Spiritually, I reclaim the God of liberation, the God of Exodus, the God of the prophets. Not the edited God, the whole God. Economically, I build internal infrastructure. I circulate my wealth. I invest in my community. I build institutions that are mine, that cannot be executive ordered away. Psychologically, I stop measuring my worth by Babylon's standards. I stop seeking validation from the system that was designed to subjugate me. I define my own metrics, my own success, my own beauty, my own value. Declaration 3. I build. I take the Nehemiah blueprint and I build my section of the wall. One hand building, one hand defending. Economic infrastructure nearest my house. Educational sovereignty for my children. Spiritual independence for my soul. Local political self-determination for my community. I build what belongs to me, not a seat at someone else's table. My own table. If this message delivered clarity to your spirit, if you now see the divine pattern behind the political chaos, type, "The mask is off" in the comments. Let me see how many people have received the revelation. Let me see how many people have moved from confusion to clarity. Let me see how many people are ready to see, exit, and build. And if you know someone who is still trapped in the instrument debate, still arguing about left versus right, still defending or attacking the personality while ignoring the pattern, share this video with them. Not as political content, as a prophetic intelligence briefing. They need to see what you now see. Share it before the next cycle of performative inclusion reapplies the paint and makes the beast invisible again. Subscribe for the next briefing, because the mask is off, the beast is visible, and the builders are assembling. You do not want to miss what comes next. Hit that notification bell so you are alerted the moment the next intelligence briefing drops. Let us close with a builder's prayer. Father, we received the exposure. We did not ask for it. We did not want it. But we needed it. The mask is off. The beast is visible. The merchandise list has been read. The rider has fallen. And we can see. Now, Give us the discipline of Nehemiah, to build with one hand and defend with the other. Give us the wisdom of Joseph, to build infrastructure during the season of plenty so that we survive the season of famine. Give us the courage of Esther, to accept that we were placed in this moment for such a time as this. Give us the clarity of Daniel, to serve within Babylon without becoming Babylon. And give us the faith of the 3 Hebrew boys, to walk into the fire, knowing that even if you don't deliver us from it, we will not bow to the image. The instrument has served its purpose. The revelation is delivered. The mask is off. Now we build, in the name above every name. Amen.